Hello everyone, and welcome to the 10th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Todd Howard from Bethesda Softworks, a game designer baking on overconfidence and falling into the trap of letting one's ego consume them across all relevant franchises. It's led to such apathy and uncertainty, and as the captain of the ship, Todd Howard must be blamed. So let's begin. Todd Howard has been an especially divisive name in the Fallout fanbase. While he certainly played a hand at making the Fallout IP more popular, he also has upset a lot of the classic fans in regards to how he's handled continuity and identity. Now, this is a story you've probably heard a million times before. What happens when a franchise is transferred in leadership? Like with Star Wars from George Lucas to Disney, it has a huge risk of losing its identity. Todd Howard has misunderstood the full identity of the classic Fallout games, ever since Fallout 3. And the most obvious problem is that he's made the Fallout games more and more streamlined. Doesn't sound like a bad thing on paper, but Todd Howard is commonly guilty of retconning the previous games. Ever since Fallout 3, there has been poor attention to detail at best, and outright negligence at worst. While the retcon of, say, Jet existing before the Great War can be easily excused as an oversight, stuff like the Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout 76, despite them being an isolationist faction, was especially problematic, and clearly a decision made just because Bethesda is so obsessed with the Brotherhood of Steel, and that's not even going into the Fallout show. What's important to point out is that Todd Howard is not the god of the Fallout franchise, and he never was. When you're gonna make a game based off of someone else's work, you gotta treat the source material with respect, and Todd hasn't really done that. He's gone off and done his own thing. Todd is an imitator, and has done very little to adhere to the original meaning of Fallout. Todd's Fallout is the series where he focuses more on the wackiness of the post-apocalypse, more than he does the deeper themes. Fallout in its purest form is a dark and bleak game, and the core idea of Fallout is commentary on how humanity has a tendency to destroy itself. The pre-war society kept using non-renewable energy, and eventually got to a point where humanity pretty much doomed itself. It's told through satire on 1950s America. New Vegas in particular shows how the violence just keeps happening. The NCR represents problems with the United States in regards to expansion and annexation, and Caesar's Legion shows the opposite, flat out taking what you want. Fallout 3 and 4 doesn't explore this concept much. In fact, they do a questionable job with their stories. Fallout 4 in particular has a protagonist who experienced the day the bombs dropped, but doesn't really do the work to explore the themes of the series through that unique opportunity. Fallout 4 is more focused on the synths as machines versus people, and the sole survivor and his family, as well as being a man at a time. Those aren't bad themes to explore, but there's little exploration of the overarching theme of Fallout, that war never changes, even though Bethesda milks that line so much. Todd also hasn't done much to collaborate with the actual creator of Fallout, Tim Kaine, aside from the partnership that led to Fallout New Vegas. But even then there were a lot of issues, such as the contract that nearly killed Obsidian. What happened there is that Obsidian signed a shitty deal with Bethesda, where if Fallout New Vegas achieved at least an 85, it would get a pay bonus. Problem is, Bethesda had Obsidian rush the game, and the game fell just below an 85, resulting in the studio nearly being destroyed, with layoffs and such. But Obsidian narrowly avoided death. Fallout was very much warped into Todd's franchise at the end of the day, and while not a bad change, making Fallout 3 more accessible than the PC-only classic titles was a step towards this direction. I think Todd falls towards the perception that officiality automatically means legitimacy, which is a terrible mentality to have, and it only demonstrates his arrogance. But to say him changing the identity of the Fallout franchise is the only problem would be quite wrong. Even to an overall Bethesda fan, who may or may not care about the entire Fallout franchise, Todd has also been criticized for progressively stripping features from his games. Morrowind was arguably the most complex game in the entirety of Bethesda Game Studios' existence. Then there was Oblivion, which stripped back a lot of features, but the game still held up well. Then there was Fallout 3, which stripped back a lot of features and left fans who were there in the interplay days questioning Bethesda. But those unfamiliar with the franchise up until that point loved it. Then there's Skyrim that stripped back even more features, but still held people over. However, we then reached Fallout 4, which stripped back many more features. The emphasis was on the open world and exploration, and less about the core identity of the Fallout series. Todd Howard decided to imitate Mass Effect, which led to a completely watered down experience. And I even heard the necessity of having 4 options at once really hurt the storytelling potential of the 4th game. There's other stuff like completely stripped progression and leveling up, as none of the perks contribute to stuff like unique dialogue options, and an emphasis on imitating Minecraft with settlement building, which was a design decision that limited the amount of actual settlements that were built from the ground up, as Bethesda expects players to engage in this game mechanic, when it should have been optional. Then Fallout 76 came out and it stripped even more features, including the initial removal of NPCs to interact with, instead relying on holotapes to tell the story. And any interesting story moments that could have happened were completely removed. The world was empty, and they relied pretty much on players making their own fun. It was a completely bare bones experience, at least at launch. It had basically been a steady progression of prioritizing appealing to a broader audience over staying true to the previous games in a series, but you couldn't even say Fallout 76 was made for a broader audience. An online game that Fallout 76 was became the most hated Fallout game, and considered the black sheep, dethroning Fallout Brotherhood of Steel back in 2004. This leads us into our next problem: greed. Todd Howard has become exceptionally greedy with his games. If streamlining his games to appeal to a more casual audience wasn't enough, we've also got Bethesda's less than stellar practices. The earliest controversy has to do with the whole Horse Armor DLC. While standard today, Bethesda got greedy by trying to charge extra money for Horse Armor, which was really poor value, and you can tell it was ripped straight out of the base game. Then there's the Creation Club, in which they tried monetizing mods, a lot of which you could get on Nexus on PC for free. Then there's Fallout 76, and all the controversies that came with it. And some were questionably legal, like promoting fake discounts at the Atomic Shop on Christmas, which was both deceptive and greedy, and not at all how you treat players during the holidays. Fallout 76 was a broken release that was never delayed once, and according to various sources, Todd Howard completely screwed over the game while at the same time giving minimal directions, as he was focusing on Starfield over Fallout 76. During and after the game's release, Todd Howard would not directly address the disaster until months afterwards, and even then it was indirect as it comes. Todd Howard, to be frank, was further and further corporatizing his games, and it only got worse as the releases kept on going. It eventually came back to bite him in the arse, since after Skyrim, none of the releases won Game of the Year. Fallout 4 was beaten out by The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt for the most part, and Fallout 76 wasn't nominated for anything, instead becoming one of the worst rated video games of 2018. Instead, God of War won that year, and topped with Red Dead Redemption 2, you've got a whole host of better games you'd rather be playing that year. Not even the boost in resources that the Microsoft acquisition had seemed to help Bethesda, despite everyone's initial hopes. Starfield came out to divisive reviews, as it was either a game you loved or hated, and the game was criticized for being outdated. And that leads us to another problem: the creation engine. Todd Howard sticking with the choice of keeping the creation engine and at the same time poorly optimizing it for the modern day has resulted in Bethesda's games looking outdated and soaring in technical issues. Bethesda is commonly criticized for buggy releases, which were usually overshadowed by the games being huge successes and overall fun to play. This problem met its peak with Fallout 76, as developing a multiplayer game with the creation engine, designed for single player, completely screwed over the game. And if you followed along so far, you might see that amongst all the problems listed with Todd Howard so far, there's the consistent overarching problem that he absolutely cannot improve from these mistakes, What worked in the 2000s no longer works in the 2020s. And Todd Howard needs to realize that. Todd, for a lack of better words, is a complete con artist. He's lied about his games so often, it's not even funny, and he's become infamous for it. Whether it be advanced AI with Oblivion, 200 endings with Fallout 3, climbable mountains with Skyrim, or my favorite, the 16 times the detail bullshit with Fallout 76, Todd Howard is not above over promoting his games. And again, since the games usually lived up to the hype anyways, it didn't come back to bite him in the ass for a long time. I think Todd Howard is to blame for Bethesda's decline, and it has a lot to do with whoever's steering the ship. And this leaves me pessimistic for Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. As much as I don't trust Kathleen Kennedy to not butcher Indiana Jones, I sure as hell don't trust Todd Howard to do Indiana Jones justice either. He's never been particularly good at adapting Fallout without controversy, so I imagine the same will apply with Indiana Jones. While nothing overtly alarming has come out yet, I imagine the game will be Todd's thing, rather than something George Lucas and Steven Spielberg would approve of. Not to mention that they are marketing this game as Indiana Jones for a quote, modern audience, which makes people extremely worried. This probably isn't going to be Indiana Jones in a traditional sense, like what it probably should be, but rather Indiana Jones changed so it appeals to woke nut jobs. So with all these controversies out of the way, what does this tell us about Todd Howard? It shows us a game designer who always had problems, but his core philosophy on making games sustained Bethesda for a long while. But topped with overconfidence in what he was doing, it led to Bethesda's loss in reputation as a quality video game studio that people looked up to. And Todd Howard was extremely unable to adapt to changing times. Problems like bugs and glitches, which existed since Morrowind, came full circle as Todd progressively decided to keep stripping back features throughout his games. It was gonna lead to a point, juggling between the Elder Scrolls and Fallout, that he was eventually gonna run into a dead end, as what was seen with Fallout 4, where the criticism certainly started to come, but Todd went further in the wrong direction. Then came the release of Fallout 76, a game even Todd knew was a mistake, because he tried to cushion the blow with the announcement of Starfield and the Elder Scrolls 6. Not even the Microsoft acquisition could save Bethesda, as Bethesda just continued its bad practices unhinged, and did nothing except make Bethesda and Microsoft look bad. We never got the New Vegas sequel that people probably hoped we'd get, and overall, Bethesda's reputation has only gotten worse. It's clear that Bethesda's touting of giving people single-player games has worn thin, as greedy practices continue. And with the closure of Arcane Austin and near shutdown of Tango Gameworks before they were saved by South Korean publisher Krafton, Bethesda has not been in a worse place. Now the shutdowns are more Phil Spencer's fault than Todd Howard's, but Todd certainly did not help matters by how he handled Bethesda Game Studios and the direct franchises that they owned. At the end of the day, bad practices will catch up with you. And for Todd Howard, his game-making philosophy is now extremely outdated. And a lot of bad decisions led to a divisive reputation, because Todd Howard chose evil. Thank you for listening to this episode of Analyzing Evil. What do you think of Todd Howard? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?